I think it's very clear that federal leadership sees data as a strategic asset and help move that forward. There was a lot of discussion about the kinds of data that they're able to capture, the kinds of analytics that they're able to push out. There was a lot of discussion around the variations of actually deploying that. So there's a lot of discussion around how does cloud actually play into this, right? And stating that clearly it's not a one size fits all. That there's gray in there. There's a degree of value that is found in going to a cloud environment and not going to a cloud environment. And I think that shows a degree of sophistication, a degree of maturity in how they're thinking about applying that kind of analytic. Because that is ultimately you have to express that data somewhere in order to actually have value from it, and cloud being one of the areas. And so having that kind of dialogue means that they're going down a certain road and through a certain deliberation that is absolutely critical to get the kind of value you need out of data.
I would say one of the amazing transformational aspects of big data is the maybe unintended consequence of bringing folks together. So in precision medicine, we're bringing folks from the clinic together with folks from research. It's the data that's driving the collaboration. We see it across the interagency intel community, maybe not the primary purpose of big data, but a transformational aspect.
A chief data officer is a natural evolution. Like 10 years ago, you knew exactly how many employees you had, how many buildings you had. Now people are realizing that data is an asset and should be treated the same way. It's also potentially a liability. It's definitely potentially a huge asset, but if misused, it can become a liability. And what's interesting as well is, whereas before data would be sort of scattered across the organization, and a lot of times, groups would be perhaps frustrated with the response times out of IT, so would start to create their own data silos, etc. There's now an opportunity for you have a place where you can, in a cost-effective way, bring all that data together. And as an asset, it should be protected and secured. The crown jewels, so to speak, you can put it in one place. The most interesting thing is, I don't think people realize today how vulnerable their data is. As it's spread across the organization in these little silos, it's actually very easy for people to get to those silos because they tend to be poorly protected. If you bring it all together, it's easier to control and protect in that single place.
I think that the big challenge for all these organizations really is how to foster adoption. Right? The stereotype of the slow-moving, agency, does have some merit despite all the gains we've heard. There's a lot of talk about how to take these and having to take these successes and push it into the very kind of lifeblood of an agency. And he was even called out as one of the number one issues that, for instance, the Treasury was facing. Right? How do you actually make this sense of being data-driven something that is from leadership all the way down to the analyst?
Anytime I'm with a FinServ customer, I recommend 3 use cases. One is just around cost saving. One is around blending a data source that you've never had access to before. Tom Riley talks a lot about new data, not big data. And then the third is to kind of make sure you pick something that kind of really does something that's, a very different blend of those systems, like weather data. Seems like pretty mundane data, but blending weather data into existing systems can offer a huge benefit. So if you hit each of those 3 points, you're in a good place.
I would say for health and life science, our biggest challenge is being plagued by possibility. And that's why the White House asked our chairman to train 1,000 precision medicine researchers in the technologies of big data. There are so many open data sets, there are so many pathologies and vectors that we can apply big data to, that there's almost not enough time, there's not enough science, technology, engineering, and math graduates, but we have to start today, and that's why we're working in the public sector to try to train as many folks as fast as we can.
And all these verticals like to think they are really different. The FinServ people like to think they're really different from the healthcare, who like to think they're different from the telco, who like to think they're different from the public sector. But I actually think across all of them, if you're looking for fraud in a telco, it's the same core logic as fraud in a healthcare provider fraud in a financial services company, fraud in the public sector. So if you're in the Social Security Administration and you're looking for fraud, it's a similar sort of core set of algos that you're using. So that's what's really interesting. I think there's a lot more to be learned cross industry, and it was nice today because we had a good blend. Obviously, there was a good focus of public sector customers, but then also lots of other verticals as well. And the FinServe session we did about use cases, it was interesting how many people came up afterwards and were relating it into their specific, public sector area. So that was cool.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that all across public sector, all across industry, being able to see what others have done and find, if you will, those unknown correlations that we talk about the data, but actually at this point talking about cross-industry type issues. I completely agree that finding those, exploring those, whatever's going to trigger that in your mind as maybe that first step is, I think, well worth it.
The cool thing about Hadoop is, like, with a lot of the FinServe customers, I'll kind of end with, you're certainly not the first to do this. There are people that are ahead of you. You certainly won't be the last, but, now is the time to get moving. I think it's interesting in the public sector. I think it's no different. There are already agencies that are doing really sophisticated stuff. Typically, they're the ones that talk about it the least. There are also agencies that are just sort of dipping their toe in the water. So, the sooner you get started, the better. I mean, the industry is moving this way. I mean, everything we've seen, and just the plethora of use cases.
Yeah, and I mean, and it is true that the risk that is associated with getting started is actually quite low. In that, the cost outlay, the way of being able to approach it, the way that you can actually make the decisions on what kind of data sets as you progress forward. Actually helps isolate a lot of the risk that I think is traditionally assigned to more conventional approaches, the quote-unquote waterfall approaches. And I think that's dawning on, I think IT within public sector gets that, but I think it's starting to bubble up also into the the mission and the business side of the public sector. And I think it's something that really has to be exploited, and to really just your being able to take advantage of those economics to actually go and explore one of those potential use cases. It's really, there's no better time than now to actually start exploring that.